Chapter 17 is another exciting one. If I had to show you about where we are in the plot diagram, I would say right here is the start of the trial. This chapter, we get to hear two testimonies, one from the sheriff, Heck Tate, and both Mr. Gilmer, who is representing Bob Ewell, and also Atticus, who is representing Tom Robinson, get to question him. And then the second person to take the stand is Bob Ewell today, and we get to hear things from his side of the story about what happened. And I always tell students, especially if you're a teacher, that there's an N-word alert today. There's going to be lots of N-words because clearly Bob Ewell is racist, and so it shows in his personality and his testimony. And I always talk about the importance of saying N-word or a different term that they're comfortable with, because it is important to understand the context and that it was okay to say, but not okay to say in this time period. It was used negatively, and that's kind of how it became evolved into such a terrible word that we don't like to use today. But it is important to understand and see the history. So I always tell students to say N-word, or if they are comfortable saying Negro or Black or African American, to say that, or if they just want to skip the word, that's fine too. So it's all about kind of establishing a culture and procedures when reading books like this in your classroom so that everyone feels safe and comfortable. But the chapter starts out with the kids. They are in the balcony with the colored people, and they are getting to sit down, and they're first in the row looking over the railing. If you can imagine, you have Atticus and Tom, their backs to them, and you have Mr. Gilmer and Bob Ewell's backs to them, and then you have Heck Tate on the stand testifying facing them, and the judge also, Judge Taylor, facing them. And so that's what they can see. And Scout says, "Hey, Jim, look, those are the Ewells over there." And he hushes her and says, "Be quiet. Heck Tate is testifying." And of course he wants to hear. So they go on. And Mr. Gilmer gets to question Heck Tate first, and he asks him what happened in his own words. And of course, Heck Tate tells the truth. He says, "I was getting ready to finish my shift and go home, and Mr. Bob Ewell comes running in and said he had to get out to his place right away." He was very excited, Mr. Heck Tate also mentioned, and that some N-word had raped his girl. And the girl he is referring to is his daughter, Mayella Ewell. And so he gets out there as fast as he can, and he realizes that she's very banged up and she's hurt. And he asked her who had done that to her, and she said Tom Robinson. And then Mr. Gilmer asked her to point out the man who did it to her in the courtroom, and of course she points at Tom Robinson sitting next to Atticus. And Mr. Gilmer says thank you, and he finishes his questioning. Then Judge Taylor says, "Atticus, do you have any questions?" And Atticus does. And so he gets up and he kind of beats around the bush a little bit, and they get acquainted. And Atticus asks the sheriff if he called a doctor. And so Mr. Heck Tate, the sheriff, says, "No, I did not." And so then Atticus goes on and says, "Why didn't you call a doctor? You said she was hurt and banged up." And then he said it wasn't necessary. And then Atticus asked him why it wasn't necessary. Because, and why he didn't fetch her one. And so he just wants to make sure. Atticus is being very thorough, and I guess basically Atticus is trying to catch Mr. Heck Tate in the lie that was concocted, not by him, but by Bob Ewell. And so he basically says, yeah, she was banged up, but not bad enough for a doctor. But, everyone's saying that her injuries were so bad. And so Atticus's point is, you should have called a doctor. Why didn't you? And Mr. Heck Tate cannot explain that without saying, because I know he was lying about who did it. And so that's kind of where it's left. And then he goes on and asks him to describe at length the injuries to Mayella. And so he's trying to recall, Heck Tate is trying to recall where her injuries were, and Atticus is trying to prove that Tom Robinson couldn't have hit her on that side of the face. And so he was asking which side of the face was banged up, and because you'll find out later why. And so which eye of hers was banged up, and of course, Judge Taylor says, make sure you have a point here, and he does. And then Tom Robinson kind of like raises his head to look up. And then something is made plain to Atticus in this moment, like in real time, and they both kind of look at each other. And So then the sheriff said it was her right eye that was banged up. And so Atticus walked to the court reporter's desk and bends down to the person that's typing. And he said to the court reporter to repeat. And he did. He repeated what Mr. Tate said. I remember now, she was banged up on that side of the face. So one last time he asked Heck Tate which side. And Heck Tate responds, the right side. And so he tells him more about the bruises he saw and how bad they were and stuff like that on the right side. And after that, Atticus goes to the court reporter and makes sure that she writes a note down saying that Mayella's injuries were definitely on the right side of her face, after he went over it again and again, and it seemed very redundant at the time. The next thing you know, Mr. Robert Ewell, is being called to the stand. Mr. Gilmer is the one that gets to ask him questions first. And so he asks him if that's his name, and he swears him in, and he basically asks him what his side of the story was. And long story short, his side of the story is that he come home and he walked in and he pointed up and pointed a finger at Tom Robinson and said, I seen that black N-word yonder rutting on his daughter, his Mayella. And so he goes on and asks some more questions, and then he keeps saying the same things over and over again. And so Mr. Gilmer asked him specifically, you were at the window on the outside and you saw it happen through the window. How far is it from the ground? He was trying to make him look credible on the stand. And finally, he basically continues to say the same thing, right? I know who did it. I saw him. It's that N-word over there. And then Mr. Gilmer says, thank you. And so it's Atticus's turn to question him. And so this is a little bit painful for the people watching and the readers, because he goes over things over and over again, trying to trip him up. And so Atticus gets up and says, can I ask you a couple of questions, sir? And he kind of smiles at him and he's like, I suppose. And Atticus says, you guys were doing a lot of running, weren't you? You were running here, and nobody ran for a doctor, but everyone was running around and causing a fuss. And so Bob basically said there wasn't a need to call for a doctor because he knew what happened, and so he could take care of Mayella himself. And he was positive that it was Tom Robinson. And then, of course, Atticus said, well, don't you think you should have taken her to a doctor? And so he basically just gets him on that. And so he cannot really say why he wouldn't take her to a doctor. Anyway, Atticus kind of takes his time and he's walking around and he's thinking, and he says that Mr. Tate had testified that her right eye was the one that was beat up and banged up, and that she was beaten around the neck and the gullet. And he said, yes. Bob said, yeah, I hold with everything that Mr. Tate said. And Atticus was like, oh, really? You do? And I just want to make sure. And so you could tell that an idea was hatching in Atticus's brain. He was, so he wanted to be clear that everyone got it right, what side of the face Mayella's injuries were on. And so he says, yes, I agree with Heck Tate, everything that he said. And he goes on and explains in detail. And so then Atticus switches gears and he said, can you read and write? Are you literate? And he goes, yes, I am. And so Mr. Gilmer, of course, wants to object and doesn't see how this fits anything. And so Atticus asks him to write his name on a piece of paper for everyone. And so he does. And then Bob asks, what is so interesting? And the Judge Taylor says, you are left-handed. And so he's like, I don't see what this has to do with anything, right? Atticus is just trying to take advantage of me. He's a tricking lawyer, and gets all defensive and stuff. And so then he goes on and he says that he ran the N-word off and he was the hero. And so then Mr. Gilmer asks if he is ambidextrous, talking about Bob. And he said, I definitely am not. I can write with both hands just the same. And so it's clear that he is not literate. He doesn't understand what ambidextrous means. And so Scout notices that Jim's about to have a fit. He's like, yes, we got him. And then he actually even says, I think we got him. Atticus has got him. And Scout's a little skeptical. She's like, I don't think so. It's clear that Atticus was trying to show that Mr. Ewell could have beaten up Mayella. That was clear, that he could have done it. And that Tom Robinson didn't do it. But Scout said Tom Robinson looked very strong and that he could have easily done it as well. And so she's watching her brother and he's really excited thinking that they're going to win. And Scout says at the end of the chapter that she thought that Jim was counting his chickens before they hatched, basically saying getting ahead of himself. So that's how the chapter ends, and you'll have to watch the next video, to see what happens.